October 1347. The Black Death arrives in Central Europe. Unknown to many, the Black Death will become the worst epidemic in human history. Several trading ships brought death with them. They arrived at ports with crews who were decimated in an anomalous fashion. Black boils covered their bodies, and those remaining would eventually become sick. The plague has begun. The plague is a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. It travels through the air or through touch. In medieval Europe, it was found to have been hosted in fleas. These fleas would infect rats who would then infect humans. In Europe, the plague first hit major trading cities. This is because the disease came from trading ships, and these port cities were optimum hubs for airborne diseases. After it reached port cities like Messina, it traveled to inland Europe and hit places like Rome, France, and London. The ominous thing about the plague in Europe was the lack of knowledge about the spread of disease. Doctors could not explain why patients would suddenly die, having their spirits lifted from their eyes. How did Europeans respond to the crisis? Doctors refused to see patients, people moved to countryside, cities locked down, they quarantined the sick in churches, and everyone fought for their own safety. The plague ended roughly 5 years later in 1352. There are many plausible solutions to how the disease ended, some being the increased practice of hygiene, migration patterns away from cities, and the overall decrease in population easing the spread of the disease. One thing is for sure, however, the disease was never eradicated. It could come back at any time with a vengeance. In Europe, many people believed it was God's retribution. They abominated sins such as green heresy because religious experts perpetuated the idea that God was punishing the lack of Christian practice. To fix this, religious people purged their communities of sin. This involved massacring Jews in 1348, believing that they were the harborers of sin that caused the plague. They also practiced dance macabre, a death dance to show their appreciation for God. Modern medicine completely disproves their ideas, but ideology in the 1300s revolved around gaining forgiveness from God. In effect, more than 20 million were killed by the Black Death. This totaled to roughly one-third of continental Europe's population, the largest example of mass death relative to population in history. The religious effects of the plague were observable immediately at its end. People distrusted the clergy and had no desire to become strict adherents to the Bible. During the plague, prayer would not prevent you from dying. This led to a massive drop in church attendance in the mid-14th century. In terms of the economy, massive inflation ensued. This was because it was very difficult to produce goods, so the price of them went drastically up. Also, labor was affected by the plague. After the death of one-third of the population, there were extensive amounts of labor shortages. This led to increased wages for peasant populations. With increased wages comes increased standard of living. Lords of medieval lands were forced to succumb to the desires of peasants because they were the only option they had for work. Because of their increased power, peasant classes would find their voice. After the end of the plague, they would revolt against the aristocracy. The Black Death would result in a huge turning point for the social and economic situation of Europe.